Hello and welcome to the third Thursday at Hoovers. I'm so glad you could join us this evening. I'm happy to announce that we have 8 new public libraries partnering with us to bring you this program. That's 20 public libraries in all. Joining us tonight are Alta Vista, Bondurant, Hamburg, Hiawatha, Keck Memorial in Wapello, LeClaire, and Mondamin Public Libraries. Welcome to you all, and I hope you enjoy tonight's program. I'm Brad Reiners, the Communication Director at the Hoover Presidential Foundation. We'll begin the program in a few minutes, but first I have a lot of news to share with you about upcoming events that you'll want to participate in. We recently launched a new website called timelessvaluescampaign.org. When you visit that site, you'll learn about a major fundraising campaign for the renovation of the Hoover Presidential Library and Museum exhibit space. It's been about 28 years since the last renovation, and we're excited about bringing new technology and other updates into the museum. You'll also learn about a special benefit for Iowa taxpayers who contribute to the Timeless Values campaign and how you can earn a 25% Iowa state tax credit with your gift of any size, no matter how much that gift is. The Hoover Presidential Museum is now open Tuesdays through Saturdays from 9 till 5. Time tickets are available online at hoover.archives.gov. And there's a special new temporary exhibit waiting for you called Leonardo da Vinci Machines in Motion. The exhibit contains about 30 machines that were built after in-depth study of da Vinci's designs by a group of scientists and skilled craftsmen. They are life-size and most are fully operational. The fun part is you can touch and set them in motion yourselves while learning about these items. This exhibit is perfect for engineers, tinkerers, mechanics, families with children. Virtually everybody will enjoy this. But don't wait to visit. This exhibit closes on January 29th. So as for tonight's program, we invite you to enter questions at any time during the program through the Q&A feature you'll find along the edge of your screen. You may also vote for questions someone else has entered if you'd also like to hear those answered. As we might not have time to answer all the questions provided, top vote getters will get asked first. So today's presentation is called A Few of My Favorite Things. Our speaker is Matt Schaefer. He's an archivist at the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library and Museum. Matt has an engaging presentation style, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And I'm also sure he has some very interesting items for us to see tonight, as he knows those archives very well. He's been going through them long enough to retire later this summer, and he's going to be missed a great deal. So luckily, we have him tonight. So welcome, Matt. We're really looking forward to hearing your story.
Thank you, Brad. Can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up. We good?
Yep, you're good.
And my screen is up. My talk today, Matt's brown paper packages tied up with strings. These are a few of my favorite things. If you were in the room with me, I would encourage you all to sing, but as you're not, sing along at home. Okay. Like Brad said, I've been at the library for 20 years, and I've come across all kinds of interesting things, including, as I was getting this slideshow ready, a picture of me on my very first week at the library. I look at that picture and go, who is that man with dark hair? Oh, that's me on the other side. Hoover had a 60-year public life, and I've got 40 minutes. I'm not going to be able to get to all of my favorite things. I'm going to limit it to a few of my favorite things. In keeping with the Sound of Music theme, let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. Herbert and Lou Hoover began their life together in 1900 when they got married, and as part of their honeymoon, they went on a long, slow ride to China. While they were in China, the Boxer Rebellion broke out. Boxer Rebellion was a rebellion against all things Western. Chinese citizens, Chinese peasants just rose up and took arms against a sea of troubles and sought to throw the Western imperialist out. Well, what we have here is a photograph of Mrs. Hoover standing next to a British artillery piece. It's not her cannon. If you look closely, you can see that she has a .38 on her hip. That was her gun. And she was quite thrilled. She actually wrote a little bit of a first-person memoir about her time at the Boxer Rebellion. And as part of that, she drew this map of the city of Tianjin. This is in one of the Lou Hoover scrapbooks, and you get a sense of her mind at work. She's a very bright, multidimensional person. Thinks very abstractly, but is also very down to earth. She wrote to her college roommate, one of her college roommates, after the Boxer Rebellion, "Evelyn, you've missed the time of your life. I can think of no place I would have rather been than right here, right now, in Tianjin during this exciting time." It's kind of like writing from Beirut in the 80s saying, or Baghdad in the early 2000s, this is the place to be. But that's Lou Hoover in a nutshell. She's intrepid, she's adventurous, she lives life to the fullest. Neither Mrs. Hoover, her cannon, nor her 38 were responsible for breaking the Boxer Rebellion. The U.S. Marines came in and broke the siege. And Herbert Hoover said to Lou, "I don't care where you go, but you can't stay here. It's not safe." So they moved to London, spent the next 15 years in London until World War I broke out. And then we see the Hoovers coming once again into the public scene when Herbert Hoover is tapped to lead the Commission for Relief of Belgium. At the time, the largest non-government organization food relief effort in history. Ultimately ended up feeding about 9 million people and led to what I call, what Hoover himself called the slippery slope to public service. He found himself moving away from his private enterprises and looking to give back. And as he did this food relief, fed about 9 million people over the next 30 months in Europe, he got these gifts of thanks. He and Mrs. Hoover would get these Belgian flour sacks, embroidered and fine needlework. And the Hoovers weren't very sentimental, except with this exception. They kept all of the flour sacks that were given to them. They were that meaningful. On the left, you see a picture of a food warehouse with some of the flour sacks bringing the flour in. Mrs. Hoover at this time also worked with Belgian lace, promoting the sale of Belgian lace to raise money for Belgian relief. And a little bit of foreshadowing, next week, Evelyn McMillan will talk on Belgian lace. So I'm not even going to include that as one of my favorite things, because she's got a lot more to say about this than I do. When the war ended, and again, I'm going to hopscotch here. I've got 40 minutes and 60 years. When war ended, Hoover was part of President Wilson's team at Versailles, the peace treaty that was going to hammer out the final settlement of World War I. World War I ended in an armistice, not in total victory. The Germans sued for peace, went to the peace tables, hoping to settle on Wilson's 14 points and a non-punitive settlement. Well, that wasn't going to work for Belgium, France, Great Britain, all the people who felt ravaged by the German army. So Hoover and Wilson were kind of in a minority in Versailles, and ended up holding out for a peace treaty that could never really happen. Some of the greatest minds of the 20th century were at Versailles, including a guy who would later cross Hoover's life, John Maynard Keynes, the guy who created Keynesianism. And he wrote of Hoover in Versailles, he's the only one who's going to come out of this with his reputation intact. One of the most prominent documents at Versailles that was circulating privately, kind of ironic because one of the principles that Wilson was aiming for was open covenants, open treaties, openly arrived at. Meanwhile, Hoover is circulating this private document where he's talking about to Wilson about the threat posed by Lenin and the Bolsheviks in Eastern Europe, in Russia, with a little addendum saying, "Don't circulate this outside of without my authority, without my say so." But basically, he saw Lenin and encroaching communism, the Soviet system, as a grave threat to Western civilization. Ironically, and I'm not going to read this to you, but rest assured, it is a very Hooverian document, detailed, has a great understanding of the realpolitik of the world at that time, and it's not in the Hoover papers. It's in the papers of Louis Strauss, because Hoover was that way with his stuff. You know, he lived life with time's arrow going in one direction. He didn't look back. You know, I mean, I take that back. He looked back only rarely. He wasn't a very sentimental guy. The flour sacks. He gave away these important historical documents to his friends who saw their historic merit. After Versailles, Hoover comes back to America, where he's named Secretary of Commerce. I like to call this the Beige Period of Hoover's of Hoover's public life. He was the Secretary of Commerce because he saw that as a place where he could have some agency. He could have an influence in a lot of aspects of the American society at large. Didn't think agriculture was a wide enough scope, nor was interior wide enough for him. But all of his documentation of these years tends to be very, very dry government documents on eliminating waste in industry, standardization, and at the risk of, you know, boring you to tears, no, I decided not to do that. I decided to go with something colorful, leaving aside that, you know, his standardization is why they named the Commerce Building for him. It was all the other stuff that he did as Secretary of Commerce, you know, keep busy in his off hours, organizing the Colorado River Compact that led to the creation of the Hoover Dam, Better Homes in America, the American Child Health Association to improve health among kids. And that's why I have this little poster up, because it has the most color of any of the Commerce years documents. Mississippi flood basically made Hoover, again, a national figure, so that when Coolidge announced in 1927, I do not choose to run for president in 1928, the Republican Party was quick to rally behind Hoover because he had succeeded as a commerce secretary, as a private citizen entrepreneur and a mining engineer, food relief. So runs his campaign in 1928, a very typical 1920s campaign. He gave 6 campaign speeches in 28, all between Labor Day and Halloween. Here's a shot of the Hoover family the day before the election. Here's one of my favorite campaign, this is actually a small postcard. Hoover of the saloon, what would Jesus do? Let's just cut to the chase here. You know, do you want to elect Al Smith, a man known to not just be a Democrat, but to be a wet Democrat at that? Wanted to repeal prohibition? No, you know, that's not the way forward. So, you know, this little girl who, I'm going to guess, had never seen a saloon in her life, was neatly on the back of her daddy's car. Hoover of the saloon. Now, the last item on the far right here is one of my favorite campaign and transition items. The campaign speech is long and tedious, boring, not very exciting at all. The campaign literature is fun, but very time-bound. If you don't know the issues of the campaign, it's hard to connect. But after he wins the election, he and Mrs. Hoover go on a tour of South America. And on their way back, the senator from Florida invites them to attend the Gasparilla Pirate Festival. And the invitation is what we see here. The bedecked pirate, you know, swashbuckling away. Attention, Herbert Hoover, the House of Hoover. You are hereby invited to attend this gathering of pirates, appear or face extreme penalty. And I had to look this up because I had no idea what the Gasparilla Carnival was. And it's basically Mardi Gras in Tampa Bay. And it's been going on since the turn of the century, and it's ongoing. I mean, I don't know if COVID has shut it down, but it draws 300,000 people to Tampa Bay for a weekend in February. No evidence that Herbert Hoover went to this, but I like to imagine him, in a pirate getup as he's getting ready to create his transition team to take over the presidency. He becomes president, and he's doing the usual presidential things. Through the first 7 months of his presidency, including having Marie Curie, the only woman to twice win, at the time, the only woman to have won a Nobel Prize, the only woman at the time to have won 2 Nobel Prizes for her work in chemistry and physics. And he invited her to Washington to give her a gift from the women of America of 1 gram of radium, because she did a lot of research while she found radium as an element, identified it as an element, its attributes. And she wrote Mr. Hoover a very gracious thank you note. And what I like about this is that this is happening October 30th, 1929, which is right as the stock market is crashing. The stock market is, I don't know, I can't see your faces, but I'm imagining one or two of you have invested in the stock market in some way, shape, or form, and are looking this year going, wow, it's lost 5% of its value in the first 3 weeks. That's not good. Grit, will hang. In late October 1929, the stock market lost 11% of its value on a Thursday, 12% on a Monday, and then on the 29th of October 1929, lost to 12% again. So it lost 35% of its value in 3 days. And Hoover is having this, this meeting with Marie Curie, where she's saying, I'm so glad you're president because you really understand the value of science, and you're the best man to lead the country at this stage. The other thing it's going to be hard to see on a computer screen is the handwriting of Marie Curie is pretty spidery. She, at this point, has the disease, is showing the symptoms of the disease. It's a bone marrow cancer. It's going to kill her because she spent 35 years working with radioactive elements. So now, President Hoover, great stock market crash, as I alluded to, Black Tuesday. Things go bad. They go from bad to worse, and for the rest of Hoover's life, he has to wear the millstone of being the president who didn't manage the Great Depression, and that's unfortunate. But Hoover was one of those guys who, if Truman hadn't had the buck stop here become his sort of motto, buck stops here on his desk, it was clearly true for Hoover. I mean, buck stopped with him. He took responsibility for what happened in America, and had a lot of confidence that if we just stayed the course, trusted in state and local government, state and local government to do the relief, had the federal government to handle the larger issues, we would pull out of this. Just stay the course. Well, it didn't really work out. Summer of 1932, Hoover's gearing up. He's the Republican nominee. He's gearing up for a re-election run. Has passed the last bit of his legislation. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation has finally passed, and he's got what he believes the necessary tools in place to take us out of the Depression. Well, these things take time, and people in America were getting impatient. It's been 3 years of the grimmest 3 years in American economic history, and a group of veterans, a large-scale sit-in, a large-scale protest in Washington, D.C. The Bonus Army, 10,000 veterans marched on Washington, camped out in half-built federal government buildings. He wasn't a mayor, he was a chancellor of Washington, D.C., asked Hoover to send troops in because the Washington, D.C. police force wasn't up to managing a group of 10,000 veterans. Hoover calls in the Army under Douglas MacArthur to remove the citizens from their encampments and march them back across the a river to the Anacostia Flats, where they had a large encampment and Red Cross stuff set up. Well, things got a little bit rough. When you call the Army out to move American citizens assert their rights as citizens. And what we see here on the lower right is a picture, and what I like is the caption. It says, Camp Marks area after its abandonment and burning by the bonus seekers on the night of July 28th and 29th. If you look under it in the photo itself, it is Camp Marks, D.C., and was burned by the U.S. Army, July 28th, 29th. Okay, this is a photograph from the Washington Evening News from their morgue. And when they did a congressional hearing investigating, the use of force against American citizens, Hoover marshaled his gathered the documents to demonstrate, look, we were acting responsibly, we were protecting the peace, didn't have a White House photographer, so they had to go to the local newspaper to get photographs, and they realized, wow, that caption burned into the image doesn't tell the story you want to tell. So they pasted over this caption here to tell the story they wanted to tell. Great teaching tool when you have high school students in who think history is just facts. It's interpretation, even as we go. Okay, Hoover loses the White House re-election in '32 in a landslide. Retreats to private life in Palo Alto, where he is patiently waiting to become the Republican nominee for president in '36. Didn't happen. In '38, he is asked to tour Europe by many of the people that worked with him to feed Europe in World War I. Kind of a reunion tour. The Rolling Stones, the CRB as the Rolling Stones in 1938. Well, he's his itinerary set up. He's going to go from Brussels to Paris to Warsaw. And Hitler hears that he's going from Paris to Warsaw. He realizes, don't do that without crossing Germany. I'm going to have to meet with this guy. And Hoover's like, well, yes, not happy, but I will meet with him. And they have a very brief public meeting. The pictures are taken, polite things are said, and Hoover comes home, and he's very polite in public. Doesn't say anything incendiary, but when he has a chance to do an off-the-record talk at Stanford after he's returned home, he pulls no punches. He says, Hitler's a madman. I thought he was, I didn't realize the threat he posed until I saw the hold he had on the German people. If we don't, if our European allies don't realize and recognize and react to this, we're going to be at war again. And he says, it's not America's war, it's Europe's war. They better keep an eye on this guy because he is dangerous. Obviously, we get into World War II despite Hoover's warnings. Hoover spent most of the early part of World War II, before America entered, first 2 years, trying to keep America out of the war. He wants to do food relief again in World War II. Roosevelt says, not a chance. I mean, there's a great quote from Roosevelt to Bernard Baruch saying, Baruch is a friend of Hoover's, said, why don't you have Hoover do his food relief for the small democracies? He's got the skill set to do this. He's got people who can help with it. And Roosevelt said to Baruch, I'm not Jesus Christ. I'm not raising that man from the dead. So some pretty serious ill will between Hoover and Roosevelt, going back to the campaign of '32. When Roosevelt dies in the spring of '45, Truman, accidental president, not Roosevelt's first choice or second choice for vice president in '44, looks around and says, "Yikes! This is a big story. There's a lot going on here. The war in Europe is winding down. What are we going to do with our troops? How strong an ally is Russia? What exactly did Roosevelt promise Stalin at Yalta? Yikes!" And Truman's Secretary of State is a guy named Stimson, who worked with Hoover, and said, if you ask, Hoover will come and offer assistance. He knows the ground. He knows stuff. And Truman hems and haws for a little bit, finally says, I need his help, extends an invitation to Hoover, come to the White House and speak. 45 minutes, May 29th, 1945. Truman is knocked out by the wisdom and just the vision Hoover has. He understands, he says Russia is not going to be a staunch ally. They're going to do what they did after World War I and try to take over as much of Eastern Europe as they can. They're not going to end the war in Japan until the very last week because they feel like they've spent enough lives to defeat the Axis powers. Russia hadn't yet declared war on Japan. The war in Japan is going to cost 1 million American lives unless we have some weapon that can somehow shorten that war. Anyhow, he sends, Truman is knocked out, says, can you write this up? 2 days later, there's an 18-page memo on the end of World War II, America's place in the post-war world, what America should do for food relief, where the Army should fit in the food relief program. Hoover at this time is 81 years old. no, I'm sorry, 71 years old. He's been out of public office for 12 years. But he's got as strong a grasp on the world situation as anybody in Truman's administration. Truman is knocked out, basically follows the plan to the letter, asked then our guy, Hoover, to lead food relief in 1946. And here we have truly my favorite thing. Not just one of them. It is, when I'm asked, this is my favorite thing. It is the first page of a speech that Hoover delivered in Cairo. He's asked by Truman to do a round-the-world trip, consciousness raising, data gathering on food needs across the world. And as you can see, it's a very typical Hoover speech. This is his reading copy. He's got little places where he wants to pause. He's still writing in the margins and on strengthening the language, even though this is draft number 12. Or maybe, well, 12, there might be more. We have 12 drafts of this in our collection. And you can't really read it, but in the left-hand margin, it's in the Catherine Milbank papers, not in Herbert Hoover's papers, because he gave it to Kitty Milbank as a Christmas gift in the 1950s. And the margin says, "Dear Kitty, this is one of the most important addresses I have ever made, HH." It's like, well, that makes that pretty cool. That can be on my list of favorite things for a long, long time. And it is. I was really heartened as I sat in here, warming up, listening to Andy Hoover reminisce about Douglas MacArthur, because MacArthur and Hoover go way back, go back to Hoover's presidency. They lived together, not together, they lived in the same Waldorf Astoria towers in New York after World War II, when MacArthur wasn't doing, his General MacArthur thing. Well, doing his General MacArthur thing in Korea, he got crosswise with Truman, and Truman basically yanked his chain and said, "I don't care what you think. You're not the commander-in-chief. I am. You're going to come home. You're no longer, going to operate in Eastern Asia as you will." And MacArthur, who would take orders only from God, I think he said, has come back and he's spitting mad, and he's coming across the Pacific, and Hoover and Hoover's allies on the West Coast and in Hawaii are telling MacArthur, "Do not make a radio presentation until you talk to Hoover." And Hoover basically sends him, "Here are your marching orders. If you want to have a public life after April 1950, you have to go, you can't come guns blazing. You have to understand how America works. They're not going to turn to an angry general. If you want to be something other than, a hero of World War II." So he basically Dutch uncles him and calms him down. You can see the first draft of what we call the MacArthur rehabilitation speech. It goes through 18 other drafts. This is a later draft where it's typed up, and MacArthur gives it pretty much as it's written. So he could be counseled. You just had to approach him the right way. Late in my career, and this was surprising because I thought I'd seen a lot of Hoover things, I found Hoover's very first set of memoirs in a box of his pre-commerce papers titled "Information for Biographers." It's a 14-page handwritten document looking just like this, where he is writing his first draft of memoirs. And I'll read this because it's probably not easy for you to read. "There's little importance to men's actions except the accomplishments they leave to posterity. What a man accomplishes differs in many categories or many points of view, but the most important thing is the concrete accomplishments. It's not what you say, it's what you do." And it's a long, like I say, it's 14 pages. I've done a typed transcript of it. As near as I can tell, he did annual updates until about 1919, and then he stopped doing it. But he offered incredible, details on his mining career, information about where he saw himself in the world. Never mentioned the Commission for Relief of Belgium, even though that was what he was doing mostly full-time from the end of 1914 until 1917. Later, he wrote 3 volumes of his own memoirs, published. They're widely available. Check your local library. Hoover's staff would get into the habit every year on his birthday of doing a 1-page précis of Hoover's accomplishments that year. And again, it's amazing. He's 84 years old in this one. And it talks about how many books he's written. In 1958, he had written more books that year than I read last year. He just never slowed down. Until he was 88, he had a vitality and energy that made people around him tired, including his secretarial staff. And then my favorite memoir story for Hoover is that he managed to write or have published the last 2 volumes of his memoirs, which he started writing in 1942 to take issue with all the stuff that Roosevelt was doing wrong. That was finally published in 2011. That's Freedom Betrayed. Here's a copy of it shown on screen. And The Crusade Years, which was what Roosevelt did wrong on the domestic policy side. And there, our good friend George Nash took advantage, looked at the 238 archival boxes that were Hoover's magnum opus, found the best copy, best version, and published it with the blessing of the Hoover family as this 2-volume set. I got to go faster. Hoover, one of the things I found very interesting, was nominated for the Nobel Prize 5 times in his life. Never won it, but was nominated. The best chance he had probably was the last one, when the U.S. Congress looked up and said, wow, Hoover's done a lot for, not just America, but for the world. Nominated him for the Nobel Prize in October. And the Nobel Committee was going to consider it in November. Hoover died. At that time, they didn't award the Nobel Prize posthumously, so Hoover never got it. I don't think he missed it, because as he said in his very first set of memoirs, it's about the accomplishments, not about the awards, not about the words. It's about the deeds. Back when I used to work at the library, as opposed to the COVID situation when working from home, I had chances to, bring in new collections, find interesting things as I went through the collections. And this is one of my favorite collections. This woman here is Rosemary DeHeck, a 23-year-old mother of 3 from Tipton, Iowa, county seat of Cedar County. And when Hoover was coming back for his 80th birthday, the local citizens asked her to bake a cake because she was the best baker in Cedar County. So here she is with all the ingredients to bake the cake. There's the cake. There's Mr. Hoover. The little 80th birthday logo was created by a confectioner shop in New York. And this is the 3rd version, because the first 2 were sent back by Rosemary Heck saying, nope, not putting that on my cake. That's not good enough. This is an important deal. That, gotta love the moxie of a 23-year-old mother of 3 saying to New Yorkers, nope, not good enough. And here's a great shot of Mr. Hoover having a donut, my favorite treat. Other things Hoover loved, obviously baseball. I'm a big baseball fan, so whenever I had a chance, I would write about Hoover and baseball. Great letters from, like John McGraw and Christy Mathewson and Joe Judge. Okay, these are names that don't mean anything if you're not a baseball fan. But, Hoover, you see him here with Bob Feller and Joe DiMaggio throwing out the first ball at a Yankees old timer game in 1960. My favorite Hoover story in baseball, I cannot find a document of, ostensibly. Hoover voluntarily cut his salary as president in 1930 and 31 to $75,000 from $100,000. And Babe Ruth at the time was the highest paid player in baseball. He got a raise to $80,000. And somebody pointed out, you're making more than President Hoover. And Babe Ruth supposedly said, well, I had a better year. Fishing, there was no way to really capture the essence of Hoover Fishing. Too many things to choose from. He wrote a whole book on it. Some of his most poetic writing was on fishing. How do I find these treasures? Well, back in the day when I was in the library, I would find them in the course of my regular work. Doing research, assisting researchers in the reading room, doing presentations, like this. Since I've been out of the library for 20 months, 20 months? Oh God, that's a long time. I don't get that fixed as often as I need to. And my current favorite items are they're my favorite items from 3 years ago. I'm hoping to get back in the library and find something new that makes me go, I'm going to include that in my next presentation. I want to be sure to leave time for questions. If you have any questions, I'm available via email during COVID. If we ever get back into business and actually open the library to the public, I would love to talk to you, but I may retire before the library is open again. Be advised though, if you come in to talk to me about Hoover, do go on. I might give you a 3-hour tour, so be careful what you wish for.
Superman.
That's it.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And I invite people to use that Q&A feature. It's on the edge of your screen. If you don't happen to see it, just roll your mouse around the edge of the screen and a bar will pop up with a lot of different options, but you're looking for the Q&A, and then you can type in questions for Matt. And there was a couple there. One of your last slides was Hoover Fishing, and he's always in a suit in those pictures now. What's the story behind him wearing a suit to go fishing?
Well, Hoover was a very good fisherman, and he understood that the biggest fish respond well to a well-dressed man.
Right.
No, that's me just pulling your leg. No, Hoover knew no matter where he was, if he's out in public, he's in the public eye, somebody's going to take a picture. Whether he's ankle deep in a trout stream or, just running down to the corner store, he's going to be photographed. So he just always dressed professionally. And the only time he would take his jacket off while fishing was when he was fishing in the Florida Keys and it was like 80 degrees and 80% humidity. We have a couple of pictures of him there in shirt sleeves fishing, but almost every other situation of him fishing, he's dressed for the occasion.
Mm-hmm. Julie's asking what kind of fish did he prefer to fish for?
His favorite kind of fish, I think he would say anything that bites. He hated the idea of fishing and not, but he loved trout fishing in Oregon and Northern California. He loved marlin fishing in the Gulf. He really enjoyed bone fishing in the shallows of the Gulf of Mexico because bonefish are notoriously difficult. They're not. You've got to be very adept and drop that lure right in front of them without raising their suspicions. And he just thought that was good sport. And he had a guide there. God, his name's going to fall out of my head. Calvin Albury, who was an experienced guy who said Hoover was the most adept bone fisherman he'd ever seen. That he could just. And I'm not a fisherman myself, but evidently when you fish this way, you send out 2 lures on one, like one line with a leader and 2 hooks and the bait. And he said Hoover had more success. He would get the double headers, 2 fish striking at once and bring the boat in, more than any man had ever seen. It's like, well, here's a guy who's seen a lot of fishermen. That's pretty high praise.
Right.
Hoover was also insanely competitive about fishing. If you went fishing with him and caught more fish or a bigger fish, you better pack a lunch. He's going to stick around until he caught one more than you or one bigger than you.
Little competition there.
Yeah.
When you were talking about MacArthur, Karen's asking, did MacArthur overstep his authority at the bonus army camp? And if yes, why did Hoover stand by him then?
MacArthur clearly did. Hoover gave him explicit instructions on how to. I mean, he did it through the chain of command. He didn't write to MacArthur. He sent to Patrick Hurley, who sent it down to MacArthur. And it's a 2-page document on how to handle the situation. Do not use force with your American citizens, including women and children. We want you to move them peacefully. Well, MacArthur did what MacArthur often did. He used his own judgment, put that letter in his pocket, and just did what he chose. When the storm blew up, Hoover didn't leave his guy out to dry. He said, "No, I'm the president. It's my responsibility. What happened there ultimately reflects back on me." And he wasn't going to hang. There's the kind of leader you want to work for. If you screw up, and your boss takes the heat.
So along with that, then Steve is asking, what were Hoover's thoughts on how the public viewed him?
Good question. I haven't given that a lot of thought. I think Hoover was very confident of his own competence, of his own abilities. I mean, he was really sure that the path he was on was right, and losing the election came as it wasn't a surprise, because he understood the reality of the situation. He was surprised that the Republican Party didn't turn to him in '36 or in 1940 and went with Landon and Wilkie, who he saw as faint, pale imitations of Roosevelt light. I think, and this is me just sort of, brainstorming here. I think Hoover was more committed to his ideas and his ideals than to winning the popularity of the American people. I think he was comfortable where he was philosophically and intellectually, and the American people could be duped by the New Deal. Well, what are you going to do?
Mm-hmm. We have a few questions about you too, as well, Matt. How long have you been an archivist at the Hoover Presidential Library?
20 years in April. Before that, I was at the State Historical Society of Iowa, and before that, other places.
Mm-hmm. And we saw in your presentation a lot of paper items that are in the archives. So what kind of other things are there at the Hoover Library in the archives?
This is why I'm not a museum guy. I'm a paper driven. I'm a word driven. I'm a oh God, give me a cool graph kind of guy. We have moving images. We have a lot of photographs. We have maps.
Furniture.
I beg pardon?
Their furniture and
well, you see, and that's just the archive side, because the museum side is its own little universe. Okay. I am not I'm allowed into the archival area, okay. Not the museum area, because that's a different, So on the museum side, they have paintings, they have furniture, they have, I don't know if they have every lure that Hoover ever got wet, but they have a lot of fishing gear. They have, I forget, 7,800, 8,000 items in their collection.
Yeah. There's also a lot of other types of documents from other things other than Hoover, like
oh yes,
the USS Iowa scrapbooks or something that people that don't really know about, or
right.
Other papers that we have collections of.
Yes, yeah. There are 300 collections not named Hoover at the Hoover Library. Rosewater Lane, whose correspondence with Imam Laura Ingalls Wilder is our most frequently used run of material. We have the papers of Lewis Strauss, the head of the first Atomic Energy Commission, the head of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, Burke Hickenlooper, a long-time senator from Iowa. Lots and lots of things. I was a little Hoover-centric on this because Hoover is, he's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Between he and Mrs. Hoover, I could do, my 20 favorite things on them 30 times in a year.
Mm-hmm. Now, Brandon Little has some very nice things to say about you, and you are the most generous and thoughtful archivist that he's ever met in the last 2 decades of archival work.
Well, that's very kind, Brandon. Thank you. That means a lot.
And he also asks, could you discuss briefly what is your philosophy? What's your philosophy? How's it about the duties of being an archivist, and what changes in the field have you witnessed during your 20-year tenure?
Well, I see my duty as connecting people to the sources. I do what I can to best understand the question they're asking and how best to answer it. If you were to ask me just out of the blue, what's your favorite document, it would be the one that answered the question that Brandon Little just put to me, or that George Nash asked me about Hoover and Pershing, or it's the one that makes the researcher go, oh, perfect, just what I need. That is, that's why I got into archives. That and the fact that history was just too bloody hard. I salute anybody who can write history, Brandon. That's hard work.
A question about Hoover and Truman. Is it true that Hoover accepted a presidential pension so that Truman wouldn't feel singled out? That's from Beth.
Yes, and he did the same thing with his presidential pension that he did with his commerce salary and his presidential salary. He donated it straight away to charity, to community chest. Because Truman was like the last middle class president. We're never going to see someone reach the presidency from his kind of beginnings. And when he retired, he did his 7 years and went back to Independence, Missouri, and they hadn't yet figured out a way to monetize the post-presidency. They weren't offering tens of millions of dollars for his memoirs, or giving huge speakers fees. He basically hung out in Independence, Missouri, doing research at the Truman Library, sitting on his front porch, looking down the street of the library.
Mm-hmm. Maggie's asking, did Hoover have a favorite baseball game that he attended? We know that he loved going to the World Series and would sneak out to games whenever he could. Was there a favorite that you recall?
Ironically, I think his favorite, and this is going to be for true blue baseball fans, his favorite. Like, he lived in New York City when there were 3 major league teams: the Dodgers, the Giants, the Yankees in New York City. And he would always say, come September, can I get tickets? And it was often the Dodgers, the Giants, or the Yankees in the series. And so whichever one was in the series was his current favorite team. So I think whoever got him tickets was his, and I really imagine his favorite game was probably the last, whatever the last game was he saw.
Mm-hmm. Just good to get out and be in the air.
Yeah, playing
the game.
Yeah, I'd be hard pressed to answer what was my favorite baseball game, and I think he'd be much the same. Just like, wow, I don't know, because he saw some great games.
And he was very well rounded too. He was into all kinds of different things: the fishing, the baseball. And Sylvia is asking, the Hoover family, or at least Herbert, had a great interest in Shakespeare.
Yes.
Can you talk about that for a minute?
Oh yeah. When that's a great question. I wish I'd thought to plant it. Thank you, Maggie, for asking.
That was Sylvia.
Oh, Sylvia, I'm sorry. Yeah, but when in 1937, they created the Folger Library in Washington, D.C., the best library of Shakespeare material in America. And the widow Folger wrote to Hoover asking him to be the head of the Folger Library. And Hoover wrote back saying, I'm flattered, and as much as I am a fan, I think I have other things that I want to accomplish, and basically polite and demurred. And she wrote back to him 3 months later saying, the position's still open, it's yours if you want it. And he said, again, I'm flattered, but I have to say no. So yeah, he and Mrs. Hoover, when they lived in London, and the boys were old enough, they would go to Stratford-on-Avon and watch Shakespeare plays in the Globe. I mean, how cool is that? Their scrapbooks have a lot of that sort of thing.
So when the library opens back up again, can people come in and register as a
researchers and hold them in their hands, as long as you recognize you're holding these unique historical documents. That again is part of what I love, is sharing my enthusiasm for history, for these cool things with people. And the library is open. You just have to register as a researcher. We'll give you a little discussion on how to handle archival documents, and we will put in front of you whatever you ask for, because that gives us joy. We get a vicarious thrill seeing how excited people are. For example, we were open for like a tiny sliver last summer, for like 2 weeks, and somebody brought through somebody who was going to be a master's student at the Hoover Institution in Palo Alto at Stanford, and brought him in, and I shared with him all that I could share with him in 30 minutes that he had, and he was just totally jazzed, totally excited. He said, "Man, when I get to the Hoover Institution, I'm a made man, because I've looked at the real deal, the real stuff." It's like, my pleasure, man. Knock him dead.
There are so many unique things to learn on the Hoover campus, whether
oh my God, yes,
at the National Historic Site or the Visitor Center or the grounds, or the museum is one thing, but then the archive site is another thing. And I don't, the archive site isn't open right now to the public.
Right, but the museum and grounds are.
Yes. And as we talked about, people wanting to see those documents, there's no charge for that, is there?
No, it's just a matter of, I tell people it's like getting a library card, right? When you go in to get a library card at the Leclerc Public Library, you have to fill out a form. I don't know what the requirements are, but just a piece of paper that basically says, I understand the responsibility incumbent on me as a user of the material of this library. Same deal with the Hoover. It's obviously, it's non-circulating. You can't browse the stacks. You can't take things home with you, because our duty is to preserve it for posterity.
So bring in an idea and say, do you have something about this? And then
yes, oh my God, and we have back in the day, when student groups would come through, we'd get some high school students who, all right, some are history fans, some are not. And, Craig and Spencer and Lynn and I, the history fans would be fine. They consider themselves that they were sort of self-motivating, self-regulating. It's the one, the guy in the corner looking surly. And so, what are you interested in? And, we'd get a guy who'd say, baseball. All right. I'll bring you out, a Connie Mack signed letter to Herbert Hoover. And he was just like, oh, what? It's like, yeah. We have these things. Cool. We try to meet people where they are and where their interests are.
Maggie has a question, and before I get into that, I want to let people know that these sessions are recorded, and we keep an archive of these recordings on our Hoover Presidential Foundation.org website, and you can see all these different Third Thursday programs that we've done month to month. And with Maggie's, we have one that Mary Elizabeth Cox did, and she zoomed in from Vienna, Austria, and was talking about Hoover's efforts and how things were set up in Vienna, Austria. And Maggie, if you have time, look through the archives for that presentation. That was an outstanding one about different countries.
Mary is brilliant. She is doing great work. I mean, she and Brandon did when we had the 100th anniversary of World War I. She and Brandon Little and Jeff Brown and Tom Friedman came in and did a presentation.
And so Maggie's asking, are there any books on the countries that were in the food relief programs and how Hoover helped them in different ways? What kind of books or resources could she go to learn more about that?
Oh boy. I'm sorry, Maggie. It's been a long time since I've been in the library. I know that Hoover did one volume of his memoirs. It was about his food relief after World War II, and just focused on that. Food relief in the 38 countries. His the second volume of Hoover's memoirs talks about his food relief in World War I. If you want to get Hoover's perspective on it, George Nash has written on Hoover's food relief. Brandon Little's book. I don't know if it's out yet, but that would be a good book. Mary Cox's book is good. And I know I'm forgetting some others, and I apologize to those people who I'm forgetting, but blood sugar is cratering.
Sure. And we have time for just this one last question from Deb. And again, I want to kind of set this one up too. Back in October, we had a thing called the Hoover Forum, and it was moderated by the library director, Tom Schwartz. And on that panel, we had Richard Norton Smith and Tim Walsh, who were past library directors, and a retired archivist, Dwight Miller, was there. And they talked about all the famous people that had been to the Hoover Presidential Library, past presidents and heads of state and all these other things. And so Deb is asking, with recent news and all, did Betty White ever visit the Hoover Presidential Library? And would you know that? And
I would know that if she came back to the research room, because we have a database of all the researchers. I don't think she has. I'm trying to think. No, I don't think so.
Okay. All right, well, thank you, Matt. I mean, that was a great presentation, great questions from the audience out there. Really appreciate all of you for being here and asking those questions. But that's all the time we have for now. I would like to again thank our Hoover archivist, Matt Schaefer, for sharing a few of his favorite things from the archive items with us tonight, and for the excellent presentation. Also like to thank the Herbert Hoover Library Museum and the National Historic Site, and all the public libraries who helped make tonight's program a success. I do want to share my screen one last time with you and ask you to remember that the Presidential Library is now open Tuesdays through Saturdays from 9 till 5 with time ticketing. So don't miss the Da Vinci Machines in Motion exhibit, which will be here through January 29th. The National Historic Site and the Historic Buildings and Visitor Center are also open for you to enjoy and to explore. And don't forget to join us then next month on Thursday, February 17th, as Evelyn McMillan will present a successful humanitarian story hidden in Belgian war lace of 1914 to 1918. The Library Museum has quite a collection of some Belgian lace there, and it should be a very interesting topic, and she is quite the expert on that. Registration is now open for that program, and it's on our webpage or through your favorite public library, one of those 20 that we mentioned. And also the Hoover Presidential Foundation staff is ready to assist you with your membership needs or charitable gifts in support of the Hoover campus and museum renovation. You can learn more about that and even show your support at timelessvaluescampaign.org. So on behalf of all of us here at the Hoover campus and the participating public libraries, we thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to your next visit to the Hoover campus.